Hi. It seems to me that we live by a number of very bad myths, false codes. And if you live according to a bad myth, a false code, then your own life becomes a series of falsehoods. One of the myths we should have dispelled hundreds of years ago, and certainly post-Freud, is that the world is made up of goodies and baddies. It's a myth that has all the moral weight of candy floss. We now have a cartoon culture in politics in which the vicissitudes and complications of reality, as well as the bald truth, are camouflaged by a simplistic narrative of goodies and baddies. Films, TV, mainstream media and popular culture support this because it simplifies reality and creates the illusion that, surprise, surprise, we are always on the side of the goodies. This is precisely what's happening with the war in the Ukraine. It's not just that Putin has been obsessively, ludicrously demonized. It's as if Russia itself is a character that has been cast out into cancel culture land, as many of us have. Athletes can't show that they are Russian. They'll have to sign a pledge saying that they don't support Putin. Food is being relabeled. News sources have been disappeared. Anything tainted by the Russian blight belongs to the powers of darkness. So we are only allowed one view. And it reminds me of when France didn't actively support the US and UK illegal invasion of Iraq, and George Bush Jr. ludicrously rechristened French toast as freedom toast. To any rational person, this process is self-evidently stupid. But given that we have abandoned rationality for opinion, feeling and identity politics is the norm. When you demonize someone, you not only deprive them of humanity, you deprive yourself. You have simplified the world to a cartoon or a movie from which you will learn nothing and gain nothing. No situation will be improved. No problem will be solved. You consolidate difference and division, and you stir up hatred, racial, cultural, personal, social, and political. This is what goody and baddie thinking does. And why this narrative suits our dominant culture is that it deprives people of the responsibility of thought. No one has to work out things for themselves because it's already done. And sadly, a lot of people prefer this. We have allowed our bodies to be serially vaccinated with untested drugs, and we are allowing our minds to be vaccinated with untested beliefs, opinions, and ideas. The body and the mind, total control. We're given a simplistic, childlike template that can be imposed on any situation: Syria, Iraq, former Yugoslavia, Afghanistan, and now the Ukraine. We are the goodies, and anyone who opposes us is by definition a baddie. So we're living in a simulacrum, a very bad, cheap movie with cardboard characters. And cardboard characters make cardboard statements. And once you demonize someone according to this and stop listening to them, you have outlawed dialogue. And dialogue is the alternative to war. Listening and talking is always better than war. Words might hurt, but they don't maim and destroy. It's a basic premise of good human interaction, good psychology, that you listen and speak until you find a way through the difficulties of life together, the sheer bloody difficulty of it. But now Russia is bad, full stop, no dialogue. And just as in a relationship, when you shut someone up, they will grow resentful and bitter, and there may be violence. So when you shut up a whole nation, what the hell do you think is going to happen? You've got an angry, silenced neighbour who's probably going to shout to make themselves heard. And shouting is a lot closer to violence than dialogue. Shouts get translated into bombs and bullets. We need to inform ourselves so that we can appreciate the nature of reality, which is usually complex, and wake up to the fact that Ukraine was in the top 10 most successful economies in Europe when it was part of Russia. And when it became independent, it lapsed into economic collapse, corruption, and racial tension. The US bailouts of up to $6 billion did not save it. What happened to the money? A great deal found its way into the bank accounts of corrupt officials. President Zelensky became surprisingly, suddenly very wealthy. $20 million mansion in the States, for example. How is this possible when your country is bankrupt? It's possible because the American handouts were not to feed, clothe and educate the people, but to buy the Ukraine as a tool against Russia. 30 military bases, including 15 biological and chemical warfare institutes, 4 nuclear plants capable of creating an A-bomb and firing cruise missiles, and where? Russia, of course. Buy huge amounts of weapons for the Ukrainian army, ostracize the eastern provinces, outlaw Russian in schools, persecute Russians and Russian speakers. 13,000 murdered in the past 8 years in eastern Ukraine by the neo-Nazi regime that holds sway in the country. Fill the borders with NATO armed forces. None of these things fit the goody-baddie dichotomy, so there's a collective pretense that they don't exist. The goody and baddie view of the world hates free speech and therefore free thought, because free speech instantly destroys the goody-baddie myth. And free speech is not some panacea to all ills. It's not an aspirin that cures all global and societal headaches. It's just the opposite. Free speech means listening with courage to both sides, and that means taking on board what a shitty mess your side is too, all the mistakes and horrors you've committed. But, and here's the thing, it's all we've got, and it's infinitely better than the tyranny of being forcibly silenced. In free speech, you might learn more of your opponent, but also more about yourself and what you need to put right. And this is as true of nations as it is of individuals. And it's a hard lesson, but it's the only way that relationships and nations and civilizations progress, and you ignore it at your peril. You will simply disappear into your own vacuousness and tyranny of belief, and you will have war because bombs silence speech. This goody-baddie thinking has affected all parts of life in the West, from kindergarten to the universities. Progressives think that they are by definition on the side of the angels, whereas they are actually part of the human Stasi, the thought police, the control freaks. And the thinking goes, if anyone disagrees with me, they ought to shut up, because if I really listen to them, it might mean that I'm not right about everything. And that is simply, surely, not possible. People have certainly cancelled me personally and professionally, and many others, because they think I've become a bad person. By that, they mean that I don't subscribe to their orthodoxies, which are usually a vague, unthought out, and certainly unhistorical version of communism or socialism, and a vague, unthought out, and certainly unhistorical view that all religions and beliefs should be respected, no matter how daft they are and what mayhem and death they cause. And you could add to that a naive belief that all people are the same and can live together harmoniously, and that, despite a cursory belief in the sovereignty of the individual, with a contradictory adherence to group identity as the template for human interaction. So it's a cult of individuality in the service of groupthink. None of this makes sense. None of it holds up to scrutiny. What's the end game of this? Well, I think that it's to make us think that our mental imprisonment is actually a form of freedom. I think it is to collapse the real historical differences between peoples and nations and races into a human goo that will never work in practice, and to replace these dynamic and often constructive differences with a series of imaginary enemies that we must be ever fearful of, a goody-baddie myth that can only descend into chaos.